Alright, so we're going to go over the solution here to Studio FlickList 3. So let's pull up the assignment page so we can see what we're supposed to be doing. Great, so what we want here is similar to last time, but this two-column layout. So now our movies are over here on the right side of the screen. And when we add things, it's got this cool little box type of aesthetic. We've got these new buttons that you can click to remove things from the list. Overall aesthetic changes using some of these new Bootstrap classes. And then real quick, I'll demonstrate this responsive layout with the columns. So if it gets too skinny, then the browse list drops down underneath the watch list. So that's our goal. Step number 1, I'm going to make this text a little bigger too. Okay, step number 1 is to add these I watched it buttons. Oh, so the other thing let's do for a minute is look at what we have right now. When we first grab the starter code, what we have is this. Doesn't look all that great, and actually my fetch isn't working. This didn't happen to you guys, right? It worked fine? I think I did put it in. Where am I? Here. Oh, I didn't. You're right. Okay, let's put my API code in. Can find it here probably. Nope. I'll switch to a there we go. That's better. Alright. So this is what it looks like now. It's pretty similar to last time, although slightly worse because we got rid of a couple things. Alright, so first step is when we add an item to the list, instead of just the name of the movie, we also want a button that you can click to say that you watched it, and it'll remove it from the list. The place we are instructed to do that is inside the render function here. Right after we make this title element, let's also make a button element. So we're going to use our jQuery function, give it some HTML, make a button element, and let's assign this into a variable actually. I'll just call it button var equals button equals. I don't want that. Oops. So this is a button. Let's also give it some words. I watched it. Let's start with that. Nothing. I wonder if this is that thing. Last time it took a minute after I saved to actually show up. No, it's really not showing up. Oh, I didn't add it. Yeah. Is that what you're going to say? Probably. So I made a button, but we never added it to the screen, so of course it's not going to show up there. So ultimately we want to put that button inside of this list item along with the title element that we made. So I'm going to append it right here. So now we're going to have an LI with a title inside of that, and then a button underneath the title, I hope. And we've got it. We've got the button. So far, so good. So next step is when I click this, I want something to actually happen. I want the item to disappear from the user's watch list, both visually and in our model. So we've seen this before. We're going to add a click handler to the button. So I'm going to say .click, and then into the .click function, I'm going to pass a callback function via which we are specifying what should happen when the button gets clicked. So in here, we get to specify what should happen. What we want to do is first remove this movie from the model, and then re-render. This one's actually easy, right? We just call render again, because we know that every time we call render, the whole thing is going to redraw itself. So the interesting stuff happens in this case in here. We want to remove this from the model, and more specifically, model.watchlist items, right? That's where it currently lives. And when we re-render, we want it to no longer be in that list so that we no longer are showing it. So how do we remove, so this is a list, right? This is an array. So how do we remove something from an array? There's a function called splice. You can say model.watchlist items.splice. This thing takes two arguments. The first is the index at which you want to start splicing, and then the number of elements that you want to splice. And splice means remove. So if we did something like this, it would take the element at index 3 and remove it from the array. If I replace this 1 with a 2, it would remove the thing at the element at index 3 and the one at index 4, because we're telling it how many. So if I did 10, it would be 3 through 13 would all disappear. So in our case, we only want to get rid of one element. But the important question is which element. How do we know what this should be? 3, 5, 2, right? And at a semicolon, we can answer that with a function we saw last week, which might still be in here. I'm trying to remember where that would be. Is it 128? Yep, here it is. Index of. So here we use it to, actually for pretty much the same reason. Well, yeah, we used it to find out if the movie was in the list at all. In this case, we really care about exactly where in the list it is. Where was I? Here I was. Okay. So I'm going to work backwards. Sometimes it's really helpful to work backwards. So I'm going to say index, whatever that may be, and then I'll work backwards and say, oh, let's figure out what that index should be. And what this should be is model.watchlistitems.index of the movie that we're talking about. Make sense? Let's give this a go. I'll add two things, and when I click this, Captain America should go away, but Deadpool should still be in there. Great, it worked. Any questions about that step? Let's move on to step 2, which is sort of a monstrosity, but actually a lot of these, as you guys probably saw, are very short. So overall what we're doing is a little makeover using Bootstrap. We're going to apply a bunch of Bootstrap classes to our elements, and then they're going to look nice right away. So the first thing we have to do is just include the library, which they provide us and which I provide you guys, but just so you could see what this would look like if you were doing it in real life, you would come here and then you would come to this part, Bootstrap CDN, and actually notice there's like a couple options here. Optional theme, this gives you like some more stuff. This is for JavaScript stuff, and we'll see what that does later, but for today we just need their CSS. So I would come here, I would copy this, and link it into our HTML file right here. And I believe I actually, for you guys, accidentally left this in, so you didn't have to do it. And I believe I did that in a couple places, so you're welcome. So that's that. So actually, I'm going to immediately refresh, and we're already going to see some changes, I think. Yeah, I don't know if you guys noticed, sort of subtle. Some of these fonts changed right away. And these are actually a lot different. So Bootstrap also, even if you don't apply a specific class to your elements, it applies styles to the based on the element type itself. So it has stuff that says any H2, I'm going to style it like this. So just by virtue of including this style sheet, our styles have already changed. So now what we want to do is apply a bunch of classes to style it further. I'm trying to get the instructions back up. Okay, first thing to do is this header. We're going to apply a Jumbotron class. And yeah, so this was another one of those, right, that I actually left the answer in, but here's what it looks like. Yep, I messed that up. We want to do this to the header, not the H1. We want it to apply to the entire header. So in a lot of the, pretty much probably all the examples that you've seen, these classes are applied to divs, I think, at least 95% of the time. But there's no, it doesn't have to be that way. And I think as much as possible, one of the downsides of Bootstrap is it, to some degree requires you to start littering your code with all these divs just so you can apply the styles to it, which is like not great markup. You want to keep it as minimal as possible, as semantic as possible, with minimal amounts of like extra stuff that's just style related, right? So if we can avoid making new divs and stuff, we want to do that. So we can apply this class directly to the header that we already had in here. So we opt to do that here. Does that make sense? Cool, let's see what that Jumbotron looks like. Nice. And then the other thing I had you do was apply a little style to this smaller paragraph. Text muted is just going to change, I think, the color of that font. Got a little lighter, so it's taking a little less attention. It's more of a subtitle. Done. Okay, so we've added this Jumbotron class. The other thing that we can do in Bootstrap is we don't have to just take everything they give us as is. We can customize it to fit our own needs. So here I asked you to customize the Jumbotron class a little bit. So we just select for .jumbotron the same way we would select for any other class in CSS. And the instructions were, we want centered text, CSS property there is text align, the value is center, now it's centered, and the other thing was margin, said, oops, what did I say, 1%? Okay. Margin 1%. So actually before I do that, I'm just going to demonstrate what I'm talking about there. So let's see, where's our Jumbotron? Here's our Jumbotron. So the blue here is the content, the green is the padding, and the orange is the margin. So this is a good way to kind of debug your CSS in general. If it's looking weird, come here and like go into the DevTools and see what stuff looks like, and it highlights this with this in this color-coded way, so you can distinguish between mostly your margin and your padding. That's where you might get tripped up, because there's nothing without this. There's nothing visually quite indicating the line there. In this case, you can see because the background color is gray, so the margin is anything after this part starts. Anyway, so out of the box, it came with a 30 pixel margin on the bottom. We can see that right here, margin bottom 30 pixels. So if I change that to say 0, everything moves up a little. If I change it to 100, right? So the thing I just want to show real quick is 30 seems pretty decent, but what we're talking about today largely is responsiveness and like looking good regardless of the screen width. And later, as our thing gets more responsive and better on these sort of skinnier devices, these numbers start to add up. Like 30 pixels is a lot on a small screen, so we don't necessarily want that. So we introduced this alternate unit of doing CSS is the %. There are a couple other units in addition to there's pixels we've seen. % calculates whatever property you're talking about as a percentage of the total width of its parent. So this way, our margin can always look good regardless of the width at any given moment. And I meant to say margin bottom. Now these things go away, and you can kind of see like the word my watch list is like creeping up a little bit as this gets smaller. It's 1%, so it's not gonna see a lot there, but cool. So that demonstrates percents in CSS and the fact that you can customize your bootstrap. Also note that this only worked because our own style sheet comes after the bootstrap, right? So whatever you declare last is going to take precedence. Okay, next item on the list was to style the browse list using some of these examples. And I think this was one of those ones that's split kind of over 2 files. So there's a little bit of work to do here in the HTML page. There's a little bit of work to do in the JavaScript page. So here, the only thing we had to do is add this class to our list group item. And then over here, render, browse items, we want this. Oh yeah, okay, there's another gift for you guys. This group item is already there, and sorry, my mistake. List group, this isn't an item, it's just the whole list. And then the individual things are tagged with the item in the class name. So we're supposed to add this, it was already there. And then, well, let's see what that does just with those changes. Looks the same. I guess maybe it looks the same because I already had that. It's in here. I thought the margin was going to disappear, actually. A little confused why it didn't. So what I'm going to do now is inspect in here why I'm expecting there to be no space in between these items. So I'm going to like hover so I can figure out what the deal is with that. Okay, it looks like there's some margin at the bottom of each list item. This group item, margin bottom, 40 pixels. Is that left over in this style? Oh, it is, because, yeah. So my intention was when you finish, all this stuff gets deleted. But for now, it's still going to be here. Interesting. Well, okay, so I guess it'll be the very end when we delete this stuff. If we're going by the instructions, that space will disappear. But for now, we'll go with it, so it's going to stay there. So the other difference between ours and the example is that these buttons look a little different. They're blue instead of orange. They have like rounded corners. They highlight a little when you hover over it. Your mouse changes to a hand. All that stuff we can get out of the box from Bootstrap if we use the right classes. And the right classes are BTN and BTN primary. And we're going to add this to our button. So in jQuery, we're going to add a class to this button. And remember, this is all one giant line specifying what this button should look like. So we're going to add a class. We're actually going to add two classes. BTN applies to like all buttons, and then we're specifying specifically we want this primary class. Now our buttons should be nice and blue like that. Yeah, great. And they still work. Even better. Cool, so we're done with this step. And this step. What's next is the form. Okay, so let's style this form. This is in index.html. We've got this form here, and this is the search bar and the search button. And we're asked to check out this example. Let's go look at it. Can't click on things. Okay, let's not look at it. Let's see if I can remember this, actually. So we've got a form, and we want to basically, we don't even have to style the form itself. We just have to style these inputs. And I believe what we had to do was wrap them in a div with a certain class. Input group, great, thanks. I'm going to finish this, and then go back and add this class, input group, because we've got a group of inputs here. And then this text field, I believe, we give it a class of form control, which is sort of a generic class you give to any controls inside of a form, where control is a word meaning stuff like an input, but also potentially other stuff like a checkbox or a select, all that kind of stuff. So you just say form control on any sort of control in your form, and Bootstrap's got some sort of baseline coverage for that in terms of styles. Let's start with this and see the changes. Okay, looks a little different. Now our button wraps to the next line, and our text field's a little bigger. It like highlights and remembers the previous stuff. I think we already had that. The button looks a little, the button's the same. Anyway, so we've got that stuff. The other thing we want is we want this on the same line and like kind of attached in this nice way. Yeah, kind of attached. It's almost like it's one piece of a single unit. The way we do that was you actually wrap this submit input inside of a span to which you apply a class. Oops. Oops. And can someone read off, what was this class that we apply to this span? Input group button. Input group btn. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it, because it's saying that we've got a button that's part of a group with other inputs, and so attach it to those other inputs, like for example this one. Let's just do that and see what it did. Nice, that's kind of silly. So the last thing we'll do is style this just like we styled the other buttons. We're going to give it button and button primary. Hopefully this should. Interesting. I don't know why it's. Oh, actually, I bet I know. I guess I should have not. I think probably we're getting. Yeah, we're overwriting. We overwrote the styles for this one. But I'm going to go ahead and delete this stuff. I kind of regret keeping it here. So it's sort of I wanted to illustrate that this process will happen, you know, as you're changing things, you're going to get kind of like dead, obsolete code that you have to delete. But I didn't want to make a million steps. It's like, okay, now go delete this thing. So I left them all to the end, but then that messes up our styles as we go. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this stuff right away. And if you guys keep working on it at home, I encourage you to do that too. Just do this right away. And maybe take a look over what these things are for a sec before you delete them. But let's just get them out of there. Now this looks nicer, and these look nicer. Oh, and let's go back to our. Oh, never mind. I was going to say let's go back to our 2-column layout by making our screen nice and wide, but we haven't actually implemented that yet, so it's not going to show up. Cool, so now we've done our form, and it looks nice. Where was that? Here. We'll mark this is done. Yeah, good question. You're talking about this one? Yeah, so the question was, do these inputs actually need to be wrapped in a div, or could we have just applied class equals a class of input group to this form itself, right? I actually don't know what's going to happen if we do this off the top of my head, but I think in this case it would be kind of a weird thing to do because, like, so you've got a form which is kind of a wrapper for all these inputs, and then maybe you want to group some of them together, but I feel like you definitely want your input group to be inside of your form. You don't want to have it be the form itself. Does that kind of make sense? Like, semantically, it feels weird to me. So, like, a form is a thing you submit, right? And it has a bunch of inputs and controls and whatever. But maybe you group those together. So a form has groups of inputs, and then a group of inputs has individual inputs. But I think you wouldn't want your form to actually be also a group of inputs smashed together. Good question. Let's look real quick. Let's see what happens if we do this. It might actually look fine. It might actually look the same. Yeah, it actually looks the same. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's not even weird. It feels weird to me. That's all. That's all I can offer for now. Okay, now let's style the watch list, which still looks like this. Not very nice. So for these, we have a couple steps. One is just the list itself. So we're going to apply this class to the list. Class equals list inline. And as I mentioned here, this does a lot of the work that we kind of did ourselves in the previous studio of making these inline block items that lay out left to right until they reach the end of the screen and then move on. I always forget where I am. Okay. So now all I did was change the class of this list here. Now we should see, oh, we're not going to see it. We are going to see it, okay. So now they line up next to each other. Recall that 2 seconds ago, this Deadpool would have been underneath here. Next step is to make them look cool using Bootstrap panels as seen in the demo here. We're gonna make this sort of thing, although without the picture for now. So where are we going? We're going to FlickList.js, and we are going to make, so currently what we have is a list item which contains a title and an overview and a button. We're going to create a little more structure there now. So we want a Bootstrap panel to be wrapped around the entire thing. So what I can do is actually just apply 2 classes to, oh no wait, I'm in the wrong thing, right? I'm in the wrong thing, sorry. These are the browse items. We're talking about the watch list items. So I'll start over for a second. So we have a list item which contains a title and a button. And it has this class from last time, which was like a custom class we made so that we could apply custom styles to it. We don't need to do that anymore. I'm going to call this a panel. Give it a class named panel, which is a Bootstrap class that lets you make things that look lets you like essentially put some stuff in a box with a little bit of padding, like what we have here. So if we just change that one thing to panel, let's see what we get. I keep forgetting where my things are. Here we go. We get nothing. I'm going to inspect this. So this should be you guys' workflow as much as possible. Make a tiny change, see what happened. Make a tiny change. Just say, I'm expecting this, and if it doesn't match your expectations, then dig in a little bit and like find out why. Or maybe you find out that everything's okay. For example, this seems to be okay. It says classes panel, so I did successfully give it the class I wanted to give it. And it has some weird, you can see there's some weird margin and stuff there. I think it's due to not, so there's an additional layer of structure I want to add here, which is the panel is the outer wrapper, but then within that we've got another class, panel body, and panel heading, which you guys could see from the examples I linked to, although, okay, now it's letting me click on things. I don't know why it wasn't really. So let's look at this. So this looks like a lot like what we're trying to do, right? We got a box with like a title thing and then a main content area here. So let's see what their code looks like. It's essentially an outer wrapper panel, and actually this has two classes, panel and panel default. And maybe if I were to go back and just add panel default to that previous one, we would see more of a visible change right away. Yeah, question? Yeah. Okay. Great, let's try it and see what happens. So the comment was, I tried adding panel default and it really did not like the word default. Okay, so in index you added, where are we? We're in, well, so in index we really don't even have a reference to the individual like watch list item. We just have this like list, right? So we don't have, in here we don't really have anything that we could apply that style to. So let's see what happens when we do this. We might see something a little different, or we might not quite yet. I think we'll see something different. Yeah, it's a little nicer maybe. We have little outlines around our stuff. But let's go further and really try to match that example code, because the example code looks a lot like what we're shooting for in the demo. So what they do is not only an outer wrapper with these classes, but some inner styles applied to the content itself. So this is like our title, the name of the movie, and we've got a class here, panel heading, and then underneath, and then within the, and then a sibling of this, I guess, is another piece of content with panel body as the class. So I'm going to try two things. There's one thing I had in mind, but actually maybe can do an even better job. So the first thing I'm going to try, what if we just add the class directly to this H6 tag, this title, class, panel, heading. Let's try that and see what we get. What? I broke it. Everything's broken. Uncaught type error. jQuery.text.class is not a function. Oh yeah, we can't say dot class. We have to say dot attr class. Because class isn't a jQuery function, it's just an HTML attribute. Makes sense? Let's start over. Add this. Nice, we've got a panel heading here. So this is, I'm going to keep rolling with this, which is kind of different than what I originally did. I'll say right now, what I originally did is wrap this. So like I was thinking what you guys would have to do is put your H6 here inside of a div. You know, your HTML would look like this. And you apply the style to the div. But as I said earlier, we can avoid wrapping things in divs unnecessarily, we should do that. So let's like keep going with this and see if we can get the same results by just applying the class directly to the title element. And the other thing we want to do is make a body element. And in this case, we're really going to have to make a wrapper. Like, I don't think we want to name we don't want to call the button itself the body of the panel. We want the body of the panel to be like a container that has stuff, including the button. Because in the future, even though right now we only have one thing, just the button, in the future we're going to have that image in there. So I'm going to make a new element. I'm going to call it panel body. And this can just be a div. There's nothing particularly more semantic we can say. It's really just a container for this other stuff. With a class panel body. I'm going to go back to the example and make sure I'm not missing any classes. Like, should it be panel and panel body? I don't think so. That doesn't seem like it would make sense, but I'm just going to go check. Yeah, panel body, that's all we need. Alright, so I made this panel body, and now instead of putting the button directly into this item view, I'm going to append it to the panel body and then put the panel body in the item view. So panel body.append button. So the button is inside of the wrapper thing called panel body. Yeah, that looks pretty reasonable for right now. It's not quite the example yet, but it's pretty close. It's partly not the example yet just because we don't have those images. Another difference is that there's like a little bit of padding all around here, and I think actually that's the next thing I asked you guys to do. But I think for now we can say that we completed this step. Any questions about that? Panel stuff? Wrapping thing? Okay, so I think, yeah, we just did step 2G, style the watch list items using these panels, and now we're on step 2H, which is to customize that a little bit more. So yeah, as I said, we want no padding at all, which by default. Okay, can I go back? Where did I put the button? Good question. The button is, so the variable holding the button is still here, and then I made this panel body, and the point of this thing is to like be a wrapper around the button. So I put the button inside of here by calling .append button. Does that make sense? Okay. So we want to customize the style of these panels a little more so they come by default with a little bit of padding. Actually, I think I remember that the reason they have padding is not the panel itself, it's due to this list inline. It said what it does for you is it makes list elements that are inline block, and it also applies a little bit of padding to each of the items. So that's where the padding is coming from, and in this case, we don't want that padding, so we're going to get rid of it. We also want a little bit of margin next to them, just like we had last week. So if let's look at what we have again. If I add another thing here, they're right flush up next to each other. We don't want that. We want a little bit of space between them. And finally, we want to specify exactly how wide we want these things, and I'll talk about that in one sec. Let's do the margin padding. So this is step 2H. We're going to style these list items. So what's the selector here? How can we get this? There's like kind of a lot of options, and I kind of went back and forth with like what's the best way to do this. I think I ended up saying any list item inside of the section watch list. The watch list, the watch list section which we gave this ID to. Could have also done something like dot panel, right? What you want to do is try to pick the one that most closely fits the situation. So like if we do dot panel, this is going to apply to all panels in the future. And maybe we're going to use panels somewhere else in our page, and we don't want these styles to apply to those. You can make the same argument here. We might add another type of list item inside of this section, in which case we have the same problem where we get these styles we don't want. So I don't know. Just could make an argument for doing this either way. You could also make an argument for actually giving these things another class. Like we used to have this custom class, item watch list. Maybe we just keep this and keep this additional class and then apply the styles to that. I don't know. I went with this. Can't even totally say why. Seems reasonable to me for now. But this is one of those things, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer. So this is going to give us list items inside of the watch list section, and we're going to give them no padding, and we're going to give them a little bit of margin on some of their edges. I'm going to say 0, 10, 10, 0. In the previous lecture, I had it like this, 10, 10, 0, 0. And everything looked like almost fine, and I didn't notice that was actually a mistake. It wasn't what I wanted to do, because I wanted the padding on the right and bottom edges, and the order in which these things happen is top, right, bottom, left. So it looked fine because it was on the top and the right, which more or less amounts to the same thing, but I think this is slightly better because you're putting this feels better to me because the margin's going after the content, you know. Yes, good question, and you know what, let's do it. Let's use percentages here. 1%, 1%. I think you can even mix units, like I can say 0 pixels, but 1%. We'll find out. If not, there's one. Nice, that looks good. And actually 1% seems to, looks about right for what we want. Okay, last thing we wanted to do is give it a fixed width. So like, actually, this is a good example already. Like, it's kind of weird. I don't think we want these things to stretch. By default, what it's going to do is stretch to fit its content. So this thing has a longer title, and therefore it's much wider. This thing has a shorter title, so it's skinnier. We want these things to be, I don't know, they should look like a uniform. They should kind of look like a set of DVDs or something. And doing that is as simple as saying width. 160 pixels. Yeah. Perfect. Actually, this is technically wrong. We don't want this little bit of space here, so I'm gonna inspect that. I'm wondering if that came from how I switched it up and decided not to put this title inside of a wrapper div. I just directly applied the class to the h6 itself. I'm wondering if that is the reason why we now have a little bit of weird space here. To find out, I'm going to dig into this list item. So we've got, yeah, that is why. So we applied the panel heading class to the h6, but by default, h6s come with a little bit of margin, and that would be fine if the margin took place within a container that was still this panel heading, which is like gray, but it's not happening like that anymore because panel heading is the h6 itself. There's two solutions. We could customize this and get rid of the margin on top or something. I kind of feel inclined to putting it inside of the div. So just to no other reason, just to demonstrate how to do that. So we're going to do a very similar thing to what we did down here. I'm going to make a new element, panel heading, set it equal to, I'm going to make a div, I'm going to give it a class, panel heading, and I'm going to append the title inside of it. And then I'm not going to do this anymore. And then down here, instead of appending the title to the item view, I'm going to append the panel heading, which contains the title. And I'm going to refresh. Yeah. Yep, that looks right. Any questions about that? Okay, so we have styled the watch list items to use these panels. We've customized them. We are almost done with this step 2. We've got 2 more little subtasks. First, we want to style these buttons. Yeah, so these buttons don't look. Oops. These buttons don't look super good. Let's give them. Let's make these red, right? Because they're essentially delete buttons. When it comes down to it, that's what they do. So we can use a different Bootstrap class for this. Where are we doing this? We're doing this in the moment where we make the button. I watched it. We gave it a click handler. Let's also give it a class attribute. of, first of all, button, but also button danger. And you can apply this to any buttons where something sort of dangerous is maybe a word to use for this. Something that deletes things, something that has an effect that people might want to be aware of before they do it. In our case, it's not that big a deal. You just cross a movie off your list, but great. So we've got that style there. I think there's one more piece of this task. Style the buttons. Nope, that was it. And then this one, now we want to customize it a little bit. So there's two things. Actually, one you can't really see right now. I'm going to do something to demonstrate what this is. So in this panel body, I'm going to put something right above here. Append. So we're not actually going to do this, but I'm just doing it to show something. I'm going to put a paragraph above the button. Actually, this is kind of messy code, but it's fine. Actually kind of failed to demonstrate what I was. So I put a paragraph in here. What I want to do is show that I just want to show that by default there's no space between the button and the bottom of this paragraph. And once we get those images in there, it's going to look a little nicer to have a little bit of margin in between them. Wonder if I can give this a background color. I'm going to do that real quick. So I'll also demonstrate how you can play with styles in the developer tools, which is a good skill to know about. We're in here, we're in here, we're in here. We are on this paragraph. I'm going to add a CSS rule, background green. Oh, did it reject? Sometimes it rejects them because it conflicts with some other kind of... Alright, I'm going to give up on this if this doesn't work. Yes. There we go. What? Oh, it looks great. So, I don't even know. We'll see what happens when the images come up. Whatever. We're going to blindly follow the instructions, which are, number one, we want these buttons to fill the entire width of the container. And number two, we want it to sit 10 pixels below the upper neighbor. I can illustrate about the container. So this looks kind of weird, right? It's sitting to the left and then there's this empty space. We could center it. I think the nicest thing to do is to stretch it so that this edge actually fills the whole width. So doing that is very simple. We're just going to say, oh, we need a selector for these buttons, so let's go with that same does that make sense? This seems a little crazy. We're only applying this to buttons within list items, within lists within the watch list section. Let's just go with it. So this is how you make it fill the entire container. You say width, and you give it a percent instead of a hard. So up here we gave it a pixel value, here we're giving it a percentage value. And the other thing I wanted was margin, top 10 pixels. Great, so it fills the whole thing there. Okay, the grid layout, we have 5 minutes. I think we can do this quickly in 5 minutes, so let's go for it. Unless people have urgent questions, in which case maybe that's more important. Anyone have urgent questions? Don't feel shy. Okay. So we want to make a grid so that it's a column with one thing on the left and one thing on the right. The way we do that is in the HTML file. We've got this new div wrapper around both sections with class main content. I'm going to give this an additional class, container. And the other thing I'm going to do is make a new div, a div within the div, class row. This is how you use Bootstrap's grid system, is you put anything that you want to be a column, you put inside of a row. So I'm going to put all this stuff, both of these sections, I'm going to indent once and put them inside that other div. So what we did, we made a large container element with class container. Within that, we put a row, and within the row, we put our 2 columns. So the final step is to give these guys column classes. And you say call hyphen something, right? Which is what I gave you guys in the assignment. So these somethings are, this one specifies how much of the width of the screen the column should take up. So 4, and it's always implicitly divided by 12. So 6 would be half the screen. 4 would be 1/3 of the screen. Maybe I'll start with that. This other question mark, you have a couple choices here. I'll go through them all. You got XS stands for extra small. You got SM for small, MD for medium, and LG for large. And what these signify is the break point, the point at which it gives up trying to be a column, because the screen is too narrow at this point, and it says it's too narrow, we're going to give up trying to be a column because it no longer looks good to be in a column, and I'm going to go below my neighbor at this point. So LG, so I'll go backwards. So this says never, if I say extra small, it means never break. Always keep them in a column. If I say small, it means break for small things like phones. So if the user's on a phone, we will not try to do a column. Otherwise, we will. If we say medium, it'll break for phones and tablets like iPads. And then large, it'll only break for smallish. It'll break for smallish computer screens, but really wide screens, it'll still do columns. So you don't have to memorize that, but just understand that there's like a couple of these discrete breakpoints at which you want to put this. So in this case, we said iPad, we want to break for iPads, because at that point we decided it's just too skinny, there's not enough room to do columns, so we're going to break right there. And this was 5. And this other section, I'm going to give a class of call MD7. Let's test this. Cool, so we've got the columns, right? Let's show it breaking. Going, and it got too skinny, so then the thing dropped below it, right? One other thing I want to talk about is this container class. You have 2 options, container and container fluid. The difference is container will give you these discrete widths, and and then as you hit a new point, it'll suddenly get wider. I'm not talking about the breakpoint, I'm talking about how it fills the screen. So I'll just switch it and then you'll see. Container fluid, you can see, is filling the screen to the max, and however much I change, it immediately responds in tiny increments, whereas a non-fluid container, like a rigid container, only has, for each of those breakpoints, it'll jump to a skinnier thing. It won't necessarily jump and break the whole column layout and go below, because that only has to do with this here, but the width itself isn't going to be as responsive. So here we want fluid. I think in general, probably want fluid unless you have a reason not to do fluid. Questions about the grid stuff? Cool. So we've got a little bit to go. 2 options. I can keep talking and people can stay. I think maybe I'll do that because otherwise I would have to record this later. So I might as well just keep going while it's rolling. So I'm going to keep talking. If you want to stay, you can stay. If you want to go, you can go. Yeah. So, okay, we implemented this grid. That was the first part of section 3. So one thing, so now we're responsive, right? Almost. But, so I clicked on this little icon, and this lets me simulate different devices. And yeah, if we, especially on these smartphones, notice how you never want this, right? You never want to make the user scroll left and right. It's super annoying to have to do that. So yeah, that's real bad on the iPhone. So there's one little magic piece you have to add to. So what we have so far is responsive to the width of the screen, on the assumption that the screen has a certain like pixel density and all this stuff, but different devices have different pixel densities and different like screen sizes that the browser doesn't know about unless it actually knows the device itself. So we can, so basically it's another one of these little magic tags that you should just paste into your HTML whenever you start a page that you're going to want to be responsive. This guy here. Where is my code? Here. Once we add this, it's going to actually be responsive to these different devices. Yeah, so that's much better, right? So now, no matter what device we're on, we're responding to the width of the screen nicely. iPad, yeah. So that's 3B. 3C, we want to center the things in the list. So this was just a little, what was it, iPhone 5, I think. If I add an item to my watch list, there's not going to be quite enough room for another one. So it stacks below, and that's fine. Oh, looks like the margin, it kind of works, okay, never mind. And that's fine, but it looks weird because they're left justified. So quick way to fix that is to center them. So in styles, we're going to add another style for this. The list itself, so just the UL, we're going to say text align, center, and that's going to fix this. I hope. Yeah, now they're centered. And we'll I'll demonstrate on a larger thing like this iPad. They're still centered. Looks pretty good even when there is more room. I'm gonna get out of this weird mode actually. Actually, that looks kind of weird. 3 in 1, whatever. I don't know. I think probably what you do in real life is you would keep it left justified, and then you do a special like something called a media query in your CSS to say. You can say real specific things like if in here you can say if my screen width is blah blah blah, then I'm going to align these things to the center, otherwise align them to the left. You can do that sort of thing in CSS with media queries. That's actually under the hood what Bootstrap is doing for us when in the moment when this happens. When the columns give up trying to be columns, it's because of a media query. It said the screen width got too small, therefore I'm going to do this other thing. So we could do that, but we're not going to talk about that. That's beyond the scope of what we're trying to do here. Okay, so we're done with step 3. Last step, let's get those poster images. So this kind of has 2 parts. First, let's just add some images to the list items, even though it won't be the correct image, just to like get something up there. So we're going to do this in watch list items, step 4A. Add a poster image and append it to the panel body. So first step, I'm just going to use jQuery to make an HTML element of type image. I have to type the stupid HTML. Image, and the source attribute on that image is going to be equal to the result of calling this function, which was added earlier. So the next step will be to like actually implement it. But for now, if we just call this function, we're going to get this hard-coded source URL to an image. So we can just call it right away. But the idea is you pass it your movie, and it tells you the URL of that particular movie's thing. So let's call it as if it's going to work. So I'm going to say API.poster URL, because this function is a property of that API object. I'll go up here real quick this is an object. It's got a couple things inside of it. One of them is this function. So I think this is another one of the things it will take a little bit of getting used to, is the idea that in addition to putting things like strings inside of an object, you can put functions inside of an object. That's what we're doing, so let's make use of it. Where was I? Here, API.poster URL, and we're going to pass it our movie. And it's going to tell us, this is going to return to us the URL of the poster. So this should give us what we want, and we just also want this inside the panel body. So what I'm actually going to do is move this code down here after we've already made the image. And then I'm going to, actually before the button, I'm going to append the image. And I'm going to get rid of this old paragraph that we had before. Dot append. And I forgot to store this in a variable. Var poster equals this. Then I'm going to append poster. Let's try that. Nice. So we got an image. Every movie here has the same poster for Tangled. So far so good. Yeah, before we move on to the next step, let's fix that weirdness of it. The images are way too big, right? We want it to fit within the panel here, and we should be able to just give it this magic bootstrap class, which is going to give it a width attribute of 100% and a couple other things that'll allow this image to fit nicely in its container. So I'm going to say here, give it another attribute for the class, img responsive. And hopefully now they're going to look nicer. Yeah, perfect. Okay, last thing, let's get the real URL. So we're given this hint here, like, look at these other posters. They all have URLs that look like this. And notice they're all the same exact thing up until here, right? This is just how the API stores its images. So they're all the same up until, or not stores its images, provides its images to us. So the way we solve this question of how, for a particular movie, how can I get its image URL, it looks like the pattern is, well, they all start with image.tndb.org/t/p/w300/ and then a crazy string. So how do I know what that crazy string is? Well, I'm guessing it's inside of the movie object that was passed in. So let's try to see if that's the case by, we can do a print statement. Instead of a print statement, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the debugger just to show how to use the debugger. So I'm going to put a breakpoint inside this function, and I'm going to refresh. Actually, I probably didn't even have to refresh, I just had to add. I'm going to add a new button, and now notice how we're stopped on this line in the debugger. And we're told here we have a couple local variables. One of them is movie, and this is what I wanted. I want to be able to poke around inside the movie just like we did a couple times in previous exercises. And I'm kind of looking for something that looks, ooh, see, this looks pretty nice. Poster path has the word poster in it, and it's slash a bunch of crazy gibberish .jpeg, which looks exactly like the end of these example URLs here. So in general, to get the URL for an image poster, we just need this plus the poster path of the movie object. So here we are inside this function. We've been given a movie, and we're supposed to return the correct URL for that movie's poster. So I'm going to say var base image URL equals, and I'm going to copy and paste the beginning of this. And then I'm just going to return that plus the poster path. Base image URL plus movie dot poster. I think they use underscores for their stuff here. Movie dot poster underscore path, and that should give us the correct URL if I didn't mess something up. Yep, beautiful. Captain America, Deadpool, Batman, Superman. That's the URL. Any questions about that? Or actually, any questions about anything we've talked about tonight? Yeah. Which one? Yeah. Yeah. Why is... Yeah, how can we align the Deadpool to be not shorter than the other two? And it happens because this text wrap, right? Because these are 2 lines. Is there a way to align this? Almost definitely yes. I would... Yeah, how can we do this? I think we can set... would you want the tops to be aligned and then the gap should be at the bottom? Or like it should stretch? Or what? Like there's a few options, you know? Probably depends how we want it. Yeah, how do we do that? I don't quite know off the top of my head. I'll look into it. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys.